Want to make a difference in geographic fields? Volunteer with the North Star of GIS and help build a racially just geography for a racially just world. Sign up now at northstarofgis.org/volunteer.
Be Black. Be bold. Be innovative. Show the world equitable geo.
We're coming together as a collective to celebrate people of African descent, the diaspora, and talking about geospatial equity and justice.
You're listening to the North Star Gaze, a podcast with intimate stories from geoluminaries. Welcome to another episode of Season 3 of the North Star Gaze. I am really excited today. In addition to Dr. Adrienne Hollis, we've got Montina Cole on the podcast today. Montina currently serves as director of the new Climate Center for Energy and Environmental Justice, which supports advocacy for communities in regulatory forums where environmental justice communities have lacked capacity to more fully engage. As principal at Jai Green Consulting, where she also works, she's worked at the intersections of integrated climate policy, racial equity, and resilience, providing clients with holistic tools and solutions for sustainability. Montina has an extraordinary background. I want you to understand who we have the opportunity to hear from today. So Montina served as the first senior counsel for environmental justice and equity at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which you may know of as FERC. There, she led the unprecedented initiative to integrate environmental justice and equity into the agency's work, including creation of the agency's first equity action plan. She also led the gas pipeline policy advocacy work and helped to lead the initiative to incorporate racial equity considerations at the National Resources Defense Council. And before joining NRDC, Montina spent almost 20 years practicing energy law in corporate law firms, representing a wide variety of clients and concentrating on electricity industry regulation. She's just a powerhouse, y'all. So, Montina, thank you so much for making time to speak with the North Star Gaze audience today. We are really excited to have you here. Adrienne, if you don't mind, I'm going to kick off with the first question for Montina. What was the focus of your work in the past, and how did that lead you to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission?
Sure. And thank you so much, Erica and Adrienne, for inviting me to be on the show. I just really love what you do, and it's really a privilege and a pleasure for me to be here with you. So most of my career actually was spent in private practice, practicing energy law in corporate law firms. And there's when I began to do work representing clients before the FERC, and primarily with respect to the regulation of electric utilities, electric regulatory law. So that's where I really started out of law school and being in corporate law firms. But I really became interested in climate issues and then also environmental justice issues, especially as they relate to the energy sector, when I started learning about climate change, when I was still practicing in private practice. I liked the folks that I worked with. I liked the work that I had an opportunity to do. But once I started understanding what climate change meant and who was disproportionately impacted by its effects, I really started to take stock of what I was doing and knowing that I did not want to be in a situation where I was, for instance, helping a client to build a coal plant. I thought, I need to maybe do something different. I wanted to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So, at the same time while I was at the law firm, I was doing things on my off hours too, like starting to go to climate education sessions, getting involved with protests, like the protest of the Keystone oil pipeline at the White House. Ended up getting arrested in that pipeline. Bill McKibben and others did the training for that. It was quite an experience. But I knew that it was really important to me to do something more like that. And so that's also at the same time, fortunately, that an opportunity presented itself for me to go and I wound up at NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council. And that was just a wonderful experience for me because there I had an opportunity to help to develop the first gas pipeline advocacy project that they had. And I got involved again with respect to FERC, which I had a lot of background representing clients before that regulator. But this time I was more on the side of ratepayers. And I had the opportunity to do that as well at the law firm, but with respect to other issues. But Here we are fighting gas pipelines that are endangering disproportionately Black environmental justice communities. And so that was a switch. And that was also something that I had not had a chance to do at the law firm in terms of environmental justice practice. And I tell you, it really opened my eyes because I really saw how people were being treated, not only in terms of the adverse impacts that this polluting infrastructure would bring to them, but also just how they were treated day to day. You know, whether it's dealing with the companies or other people in coalition, I got to see how people were being treated in a kind of micro and macro level. And, you know, how they say, you know, you see something, you can't unsee it. I couldn't unsee it. And I really became very committed to environmental justice then at NRDC. And so that was just great. Again, a good experience in there. And then I builded on that when I left to start my consulting practice, Jai Green Consulting. And I got to do some of the same things that I was doing at NRDC, plus some other things with more people. So that's really how I got grounded in doing this work through, you know, starting in the private sector, but then learning about the issues that are presenting themselves, existential issues of climate change and environmental justice, and, you know, moving to the NGO world and being really committed and really passionate about and caring about these issues where I sit now.
Can I pull on this a little bit, Montina, and ask you to talk about Jai Green? First of all, why is it called Jai Green? And number two, how does that differ from the work that you are doing at NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council?
Right. So Jai Green is actually, I tried to inject a little bit of yoga into it. I'm actually a student of yoga. I'm certified to teach various forms of yoga. But Jai is a Sanskrit term that means victory. And so I thought, okay, victory to green, Jai Green. So that's the background behind it. Yeah. And I had the opportunity to, one of the things I didn't mention when I did at NRDC, there was, of course, the external facing work, but also had the opportunity to do some internal work. And I helped to lead the first equity initiative that they have to develop an equity tool and an assessment around how we did our advocacy, right? Looking at it from the equitable point of view and developing an equity tool to help guide our advocacy as we went forward. So when I started Jai Green, I had an opportunity to continue to do that kind of work, but with additional kinds of organizations, and also to, you know, be a strategic advisor on certain policy issues too. At Jai Green, the focus is on integrated climate policy, racial equity, and resilience in the intersections of those three areas.
And Montina isn't saying it, but giving us a small bird's eye view of her phenomenal body of work. So I just want to make sure we all get that, the impact of her work. And Montina, I'm going to take you from NRDC, from FERC, and talk about how the relationship between what you observed in both places and just generally, and how the Center for Energy and Environmental Justice came about as a result of that.
Sure. So let me start a little bit with FERC. So, and also I shouldn't assume, right? Because, you know, what is FERC? Most people have never even heard of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And one of my friends has said in this arena that we play in, environmental justice, energy, and environment, I think it was Tyson Slocum, actually a public citizen, that said that FERC is the most important agency you've never heard of. And so just so people know, FERC, it regulates many parts of the energy industry. Only at the wholesale and interstate levels, though. So it regulates things like the interstate transmission of electricity, of gas, methane gas, and oil. It reviews gas pipeline proposals, as well as other types of infrastructure. But the bottom line is that it's really important because, of course, energy is very critical to our lives, right? It powers everything that we need to really live. And so they regulate a great swath of the energy industry at the federal and interstate level. When I got a chance to go to FERC, this is when I was at the consulting firm, and a wonderful person, Rich Glick, who was an old friend of mine, became chair. He was appointed chair by President Biden. And he said that he wanted to do something about environmental justice. And he used to say this publicly. He would say, it's no secret that FERC needs to do better on environmental justice. One thing I didn't talk about is, as a kind of a case study, is the Atlantic Coast Pipeline case. That was a case of, a 600-mile, $7.5 billion multi-state pipeline that would have run through West Virginia, into North Carolina, including through a historic Black community, a freedmen settlement community called Union Hill in Buckingham County, Virginia, one of the a rural community, one of the most poor communities in the state. Very sacred sites there, lots of elders, and they would have been placed almost smack dab right up against a compressor station, which is this very polluting part of a pipeline route that it helps to push the gas through. So it's a very industrial facility that's part of a pipeline route. And they would have been right there, right near it, and of course, coming right into play with everything that they had already to deal with at a baseline level in terms of, what the health disparities look like in our community there. So, you have FERC approved that a pipeline, but it is one of the success stories because ultimately it was canceled after a huge and wonderful effort of a very broad coalition of people who opposed that pipe. And I believe that cancellation, ultimately the company just backed away and said too much, was in large part, I believe, due to the environmental justice movement that got behind that and amplified and shone a light on what would have happened to Union Hill. And that really was a story that became very widely known. Yeah. So everybody understood that FERC had an issue, and because FERC had approved it, right? It only got canceled because of the pushing that happened afterwards. So when Rich Glick came on board, he wanted to start an EJ and equity initiative. And one of the things he wanted to do was to create a position for a senior counsel for environmental justice and equity. And that was one of many things that happened during his tenure that, were supportive of environmental justice and equity. So I had an opportunity to lay a foundation, certainly not near as much as we would have wanted to accomplish, but to lay a foundation at the agency in terms of looking at bringing those tools into play about, let's assess how FERC does things, its practices, its policies, its processes, and what does that look like from an equity perspective? Who's benefited and burdened by the way that FERC operates? And so we did that, and we produced the first equity action plan that FERC had ever done. We also did some supports for training for staff and just a number of other things. And so that was a great experience. But I'll have to say, and this helped to, inform why I ultimately left as well. One of the things that we did was to revise what was then a 25-year-old outdated policy called the Certificate Policy Statement, which is the policy that FERC uses to govern how it reviews gas pipelines. And that statement is outdated. And so we came and we revised it, and we were able to inject a lot of good considerations into it and guidelines about environmental justice. For instance, that we need to take in consideration cumulative impacts, that we need to acknowledge the fact that environmental justice communities have endured a disproportionate burden of polluting infrastructure. So that kind of language and that kind of guidance was in this revised policy statement. Well, what do we want to do that for? Because it certainly got the industry irate in the gas industry, and it got also the Senator Manchin, who was the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, which had oversight authority over FERC. It got him irate as well. So between people on Capitol, and he wasn't the only one, but between folks on Capitol Hill and folks in the industry who just could not believe, that this is just too much. And that also coincided with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So you had people saying things like, oh, we need more gas, despite the fact that many in Europe were then turning more to renewables, right? That argument didn't really hold water. So bottom line, Rich Glick was not confirmed, although President Biden re-nominated him to continue in his chairmanship position. Senator Manchin refused to give him a nomination hearing. And so he was, not going to be at the commission. And that was around also the same point that I was feeling that, I can still do more on the outside. And missing the fight on the outside. There was a lot that we got to do, again, not near enough to lay a good foundation, but there's also, value in being on the outside. And so around that same time, I decided to return back to Jai Green.
Invest in racial equity and geography. Your donation to the North Star GIS fuels scholarships, mentorship, community-driven initiatives, and more. Give today at northstargis.org/donate.
But what's the relationship between all of that and the center?
Yes. So I tell you so many blessings I've had in my life. Around the same time that I returned to Jai Green, I had an opportunity to apply for an Open Society Foundation's fellowship called the Leadership in Government Fellowship, which I was awarded. And so that gave me the opportunity, the time and space to focus on a project, which was to develop a tool for EJ communities to use at FERC to help them to make the case about cumulative impacts of gas projects. And so that was something that I focused on. But that project was also part, and I would say emphasize part, of the driver for me creating the center. Because I'd had in mind for some time, informed by all my career experience, the need for our communities, particularly Black environmental justice communities, to, for instance, have the same kind of training and capabilities that folks in big law firms have, get the kind of training that I had, right? To not just rely on big green organizations, environmental organizations, to represent EJ communities at FERC, although I'm very pleased that they do, and they are great allies. But I also wanted to have us have the ability to, bring forth our own stories, our own facts, our own data at FERC. Nobody knows our communities better than we do. I wanted us to be able to be better informed and impactful members also of coalitions that we operate in, right? Because, the better informed and the better empowered we are also acting in coalition, the better off we are and everybody else. And you don't, take down these big kind of infrastructures by yourself. It really does take a village. So all those things were kind of, rambling in the back of my head for many years. And also, I've been blessed to have many opportunities to work in lots of different projects. And people sometimes will come to me and say, wow, Montina, essentially, I don't know anybody else like you has this, you're a Black woman and you have this law firm experience and you've worked here and you've worked there and you're just great. Montina, one person told me, you're a unicorn. And I said, I understand that was meant to be a compliment. And I appreciate that. But I thought to myself, no, that's not the answer. We don't want there to be only one or only two or only three. And so I look at the center as being like the anti-unicorn center, because it will be successful if at, 5 years down the line or sooner, we have 100 Montinas, we have 100 Adriennes, we have 100 Ericas, right? It's not just only can be only one type of situation. Yeah. I couldn't do all that work. I turned down lots of work. So that's really kind of the impetus behind it. And that's helped to inform, why I wanted to create the center.
Wow. I love that vision. I love that for all of us, for the EJ community. And I can tell that you're living what I always tell people, that environmental justice is not a job, it's a calling. Mm. When we take a step back and think about how we can be more helpful, then that is the us actualizing that motto, right? That reality, that it's a calling, and we want to know how we can do more. So I appreciate that. Now I want to know, what are you doing? What you doing now? What's the center doing? What is happening? Right. Because you've talked about so many different things with such passion. I want to know what Montina Cole is working on right now.
All right. So let me first of all just say a little bit about what the center is.
Okay.
So the center is intended to enhance, to support advocacy on climate-related issues that impact the most overburdened EJ communities, and that's Black EJ communities, to help to support advocacy in regulatory forums where our communities have lacked the capacity to really engage more meaningfully. And those, end up being technical-oriented forums like FERC. So basically, the center really has three overall roles. One, it serves as a training resource, right? So we're equipping folks, environmental justice organizations in particular, and those they represent, equipping folks to be able to participate through trainings, whether it be webinars, whether it be hands-on. What I envision, and the center envisions, is to have a fellowship program where we actually have people come and we'll work on FERC cases together, because I believe the best way to learn is by doing.
I'm going to stop you for a minute. I'm sorry. Didn't you create a certification program on FERC? I just want to slide that in right there, because that's a perfect example of the training that you were referring to.
Yes, I'm glad you say that. It wasn't a center project per se, but it's certainly one of the tools that we point people to. And that is that I did a training for the Chisholm Legacy Project, a wonderful, wonderful organization led by Jackie Patterson. And she had the great idea of putting together a certification program where folks would come and take different courses for instance, on energy justice, water justice, what have you. And she asked me to come on board and do one of these certification courses about how to navigate the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to advance a just future. And so I did that. And it is a series of several hours course that you can take. And I highly, highly encourage people to take the course. You can get different levels of certification depending upon what you do in response to taking the course. So that is a tool that certainly the center recommends and will be using with people that work with us at the center. So yes, that's an example of the kind of training that we provide. And secondly, also, I see at the center is envisioned as really a thought leadership space, so that we can come together and have not just thoughts about how to move forward from a policy perspective and strategy perspective and the defensive mode that we are in necessarily in these times especially, but also with a forward, future focused to our thinking, right? We understand that, government has never been perfect. Right now, we're fighting to keep what is being dismantled. Not that it's imperfect, but that we also know that we need this, but we need to build on it and envision new ways to go forward. So it is a space for thought leadership around best practices and what we want to see going forward when we emerge from this mess, because we will. And then thirdly is also a center for providing resilience support, resilience tools for our communities, something to foster personal and collective well-being. It's not easy to navigate life in general, especially these days, but especially for frontline communities. They're dealing with all kinds of stressors and trauma, really, related to the environmental injustices that they experience. And that's where I pull on a lot of the kind of the yogic tools that I've been blessed to, learn about and teach a little bit about in my life as well. So those are the different overarching roles. And I should also mention, too, that its model is one of partnership, both in terms of working with, the communities that we serve, and also of bringing partnerships to bear in serving these communities. The center, I cannot do the work alone. Again, it's the no unicorn approach, right? And I want to also stress that it's really very brand new. We're very much still in the startup stage. And we are also a fiscally sponsored project at the Movement Strategy Center, which is a wonderful organization.
I want to ask you a two-part question. You've referred to environmental justice communities. So let me ask you, how do you define those? And because I'm a GIS person, where do you find those environmental justice communities?
Well, good question. And I know that you already know the answer to that. But when I think about environmental justice and environmental communities, first of all, the center is focused on working hand in hand with environmental justice organizations who serve communities. That's really the focus. And when we think about environmental justice, we are thinking about communities that are disproportionately impacted by certain forms of environmental harms. And that's been, by and large, people of color. That's been also tribal communities. But what the center wants to do is get at those who are that are worst impacted, those who are most marginalized, those who are most burdened. And data shows very clearly that the most burdened communities have been Black environmental justice communities. They are largely in the South. All we have to do is think about Cancer Alley. But the reason why we are uniquely impacted, of course, is because of the historical legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, which continues to live on. So those are the kind of communities I'm talking about when I'm talking about environmental justice communities, and the center seeks to partner with environmental justice organizations that serve our communities.
On the GIS piece, my perspective has to do with place. I think place is connected intrinsically to environmental justice. And I'm thinking about the work that you are doing training environmental justice organizations. Is there a role for us as North Star to play and perhaps helping to put some of the GIS tools into the hands of these communities? And what might that look like for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy you mentioned that. And let me kind of contextualize it a little bit. So one of the first things that the center is doing through its first program, which is called FERC for All, is being involved in 2 gas pipeline cases. They are mega cases, pipeline proposals. One is called the South System Expansion 4, SSE4 for short, and the other is called Mississippi Crossing, MSX. We're talking about, a total of over 600 miles of new pipeline. SSE4 would run through Alabama and Georgia. Mississippi Crossing would run through Mississippi and Alabama. And we're talking, and you can guess whose communities, are being disproportionately targeted. So this is a very important case because we want to make sure that our communities, one, are aware of what's happening, right? And we're coming into this case, it's already ongoing, it's in the application stage, but there's still opportunity to get involved, to do things like file comments, to organize on the ground. And so one of the things that's really important is we try to educate not only ourselves, but others that we want to influence, is to be able to explain what this thing means and who's being impacted. And this is where maps really are a very important tool. Now at FERC, what the companies, the pipeline developers are required to do is to file what are essentially paper maps. I mean, they're in PDF format and online amongst hundreds of other pages, in their applications. We're talking like ultimately thousands of pages that are in these dockets that you have to, look through. They're buried, you have to find them, and then you look at it and you want, and the question is, how am I impacted? Does that piece of paper answer the question? No. I mean, you don't have an ability to even figure out where you are on that map. So that's why it's really important, I think, to have interactive maps and the kind of interactivity that a GIS map allows us to have, and to not only be able to place ourselves, to see where the places are, where I'm situated, where's my school, where's my church, where are the hospitals, how close are they to the pipeline? Not only to be able to see that, but to be able to add in layers, right? When we're talking about the cumulative impact of these pipelines, there's a certain baseline that these pipelines already come to, what I call the black baseline. And that is that you're, by and large, going to be looking at higher rates of respiratory illness, cancers, and things like that, because we're disproportionately near already polluting facilities. So where are those facilities? We need to see that. We need to be able to visualize all this. So where we are, and then all the layers that impact us. And I think that's a very important thing that, GIS mapping can provide. And it's something that we really don't have. We've had some people step into the gap, some organizations to have mapped certain parts of it, but there's a critical need really for folks to map the Mississippi Crossing pipeline. That's something that's not been done at all. I mean, one of the meetings that I convened with some of the EJ folks around this pipeline, one of the folks said, hey, I want to go and talk to my, representative about this. Yeah, I need some handouts. And so, that'd be great to be able to take a snapshot of that, what I just described, put it in the handout form, and then hand it to them. So, because we know everybody's not, on the internet because of the digital divide. So it's just many benefits that can accrue from having GIS mapping. And it's something that's really, really needed in this space.
Thank you so much for that. I know that we've got a call to action coming, but I'm taking this as a personal call to action to try to galvanize the North Star community to see how we can support the work that you are doing at the center.
Definitely the mapping. If we, on my wish list right now is an interactive map, GIS map of the Mississippi Crossing route, for sure. And I should say too, that it's not just necessary for these pipelines. These are only two of many pipelines that are being proposed for the South. There's the SSEP pipeline. There's the Boardwalk pipeline. I could name many others, and more coming down the pike. Because under the current circumstances in which we live now, the environment is such that, people are coming forward, and we're seeing proliferation of polluting pipelines and other harmful infrastructures.
Drill, baby, drill. Drill, baby, drill.
Okay. Exactly.
Montina, I'm so excited about this project. I know I've been kind of following you and volunteering to sit there and look like I know what I'm talking about when I don't, but I'm learning so much. But when you talk about the pipelines, and earlier you mentioned cumulative exposures, and I'm seeing a total connection between all of the pipelines you just talked, not just the two, but you said there are many more and many more coming. Wouldn't it be great to have a map? Check this, this interactive map also have on it information on different health effects caused by, because these are gas pipelines we're talking about. Of course, you also see other types of pipelines that some of which may travel a similar route, right? And so the exposures can be from one or more different sources. So it seems like knowing that if a person, say I put my area code in and I know that depending on what I'm exposed to, what pipeline I'm near, that these are some of the health effects that have been reported, or these are some of the potential health effects from different contaminants. And I'm wondering if that one of the reasons that this would be so important and it's so imperative. And I think in our conversations, you've said something about this can be replicated for a lot of different, a lot of different things outside the pipeline, and can you just talk briefly about that, about the larger picture of how important this work is and this mapping is?
Sure. I mean, in terms of other contexts, as I said, there's other pipelines coming down the pipe. So we have the opportunity to use these tools in other cases, but also, there's other forms of infrastructure that may not necessarily be infrastructure that people want in their backyard, and rightfully so. Data centers come to mind, right? And all the issues that they present, use of water, noise, other types of things. And that could be, worth a webinar in and of itself just to talk about data centers. But let's see where they fall on the map. Let's visualize that. And in fact, what we see is that, some of these pipelines are providing that as one of the big reasons why they're so-called needed. Because, we need this gas to be able to fuel the power plants that will then in turn serve these data centers. Mm-hmm. Now, we're also, of course, that the projected need is overinflated, and a lot of data is beginning to support that. But this is being, touted as something that's needed, and they're being constructed in many of our communities. I mean, think about Memphis. That's just a horrible case study about what can happen to a community, and all the gas-fired plants that are powering turbines that are powering that center. So it'd be great to also, when we talk about layers, yes, the health indicators, like you mentioned, Adrienne, but other polluting infrastructure. And that I would add that data centers. Yeah. So that's something whenever anybody's thinking about or hearing about a data center coming to their community, let's get the mapping out and let's see what other factors are there that need to be shown in that map.
And I'm so glad you mentioned data centers, because that will be the next podcast after this one. So this is a perfect segue into the importance of that and how these are all connected. So how cool is that we can do that plug and let people know what's to come. And I appreciate that. And I think it's important to, with all of the information that we've learned today, I think it's important to talk a little bit more. People normally have three main questions, right? What is it? How does it affect me? And what can I do about it? And we've gotten information, particularly when it relates to these pipelines and the importance of mapping on what it is, what the pipelines are all about and why they're a concern. And we talked a little bit about general health effects, knowing that our marginalized communities have higher adverse health conditions from their location and the things that they are exposed to and that they have to live with. But now I want to ask you, all this, it's not gloom and doom. I mean, we talk a lot generally in the EJ space and other spaces about community involvement and participation and engagement, and not just communities, but those of activists and advocates for these issues. So I know you've been focusing on the two pipelines in Alabama and Mississippi and Alabama. So the MSX and the SSE4. So where can we get involved, since that's the immediate threat that the center is focused on? What can people do? What have people done, and where can we fit in?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would suggest many different ways. One, first of all, please feel free to reach out to the center. And the website is climatecenterforeej.org. I would also suggest that folks reach out to the Office of Public Participation, OPP, which is at FERC. OPP is actually a wonderful, what I think of as the bright shining light at FERC right now. It's a wonderful office that was created when Chairman Rich Glick was there. And it is created to support regular folk who don't have big attorneys and consultants and everything representing them at FERC. Regular folk who don't know much about FERC, to help and support them in engaging at FERC. So they promote public participation at FERC. And it's run by a wonderful director, Nicole Sita-Rahman. You can just go on FERC's website and you'll see the page for OPP, the Office of Public Participation. And they have all sorts of, they'll talk to you. They're very responsive, talk to you on the phone. They have tons of different explainers and how-to sheets about how to file comments at FERC, how to get involved, breaking down complex type concepts. So I would encourage you to reach out to OPP. I'd, again, just say, look into taking the Chisholm Navigating FERC for Justice certification course, which I taught. And also to monitor FERC dockets. And again, this is something that OPP and others can help folks with, to just try to monitor what's going on at FERC and see what's coming down the pike, to get in front of things. I'd encourage people to join coalitions or groups that are already involved, seek out environmental justice organizations that are involved in some of these things. A lot of the times, like Deep South Center, like We Act, so many different other organizations. And these are kind of ways, point of entry into getting involved. And then once you're involved, you have the opportunity to do things like file comments, attend scoping sessions, and other things. So I'm very, very happy to, hear from anybody who wants some help and how do I get involved. So the center, OPP at FERC, EJ organizations, and then just going onto FERC's website to try to monitor what's happening.
And you guys, the center has been doing that in relation to these pipelines, or where are you in that process with FERC?
Right. Again, very, very beginning stages. And we came into these cases midstream. But yeah, we've had the opportunity to do some open house sessions where I just invite people to ask any questions that they may have about, how do the same thing you're asking, Adrienne, how do I get involved? How do I file a comment? How do I logistically do that? And then, substantively, what should I put in it? And then just having some kind of educational information sharing type meetings too among EJ folks. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've been doing some of that.
And you all have submitted comments then?
Not the center per se. And the center is not really engaging in that way. But what we want to do, again, is to support and uplift our communities, our EJ organizations, and the communities that they represent in putting forth their stories themselves, supporting them in doing that.
And people can submit maps like that you guys were discussing earlier, the GIS maps. People can submit that as part of their comments?
Sure. I mean, I think that people could certainly, take a PDF picture, for lack of a better word, and submit it, or a link to it that people could go on and see. Absolutely, people could do that. And that's a very good idea. That's a very good thing to do. Not just having just this written, one piece of paper. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? But a link to a GIS map, that's worth, how many more hundreds of words for people to actually see it.
Thank you for all of this great information. And then I have, because I'm a lawyer, I can't help myself, I have a litigation question. So would these maps that, we've all been discussing be helpful in litigation against companies that want to, for example, expand a pipeline or enhance a pipeline? Would they be useful in addressing some of the claims or concerns that company might make in their applications, for example, to FERC, or some of the things that they may say there are no communities nearby, or nobody's going to be at risk, or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that would certainly bolster our case, bolster comments in putting this just another, more evidence, more facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to not just be relying on what the company says. FERC is an independent agency, and it should be weighing all the information coming in from all different interested parties. And the more that we can make things plain at FERC, that's good. And then also it'll be made plain for the courts to the extent that we get an unfavorable decision, which of course we know happens a lot at FERC. And then it gets appealed to the higher level, to a court. So that would also be an evidence and reviewed by a court as well.
Thank you for that. When you brought up the Buckingham County issue against the ACP pipeline, I immediately remember, because I too was one of the people who had some, we participated in a people's tribunal. Thank you, for against human atrocities. That wasn't the correct term, but I remember that the community had created, and it's the Friends of Buckingham County had created this map. And that particular map was a map of this grave site that would have been ended had the pipeline gone through. And they were able to show on this map where their ancestors had been buried by using some sort of data process. You remember what I'm talking about? And they were showing that if you disturb this sacred ground, that these are our ancestors, and this is one of the small things that can happen, small but important things, because this is our history. And as you said, it was a freedmen's community. That means created by former slaves or the descendants of former slaves.
Right. Yes. I'm so happy you mentioned that. That was a remarkable thing, right?
Yeah.
And even picked up what they call the sunken graves. Graves that
Right.
didn't have the headstones, right? But like you said, they were able to detect it using that technology.
Right.
All was just was wonderful. And they brought that to bear, and they brought it to bear successfully before court, right? Not with respect to the FERC case, because there's many different, sometimes related cases when it comes to these projects. And they appealed a negative decision that they got from a state regulator regarding an air and water quality permit that was needed. And the court took that type of evidence, there was other different kind of evidence that they put forward, but the court was cognizant, what was put forward. So again, it's very important to get all these things in the record because it can certainly help to support your case before an appeal. And they won that case on appeal.
So getting this information, although we say for FERC, it can be used, if I'm reading you right, at the state and local level too. It can be used in a variety of ways. That's how impactful this sort of information is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Before regulatory agencies, before courts, in community meetings, just as educational tools, before representatives, elected officials at the state and local level, many different ways it can be used, and then to be used in different contexts later. Mm-hmm. And also to mention that it's important, I think, that not only that we map the harms, but also the good things about our communities. Because when I think about the Black baseline, it's not always just about the our challenges, but also our treasures, right? And I know, Erica, you mentioned place. Place is very important to us. So we want to be able to see and visualize, the great things, our cultural heritages, sacred spaces, grave sites. That's very important to us to be able to lift up what is wonderful about our communities, in which we don't want to be adversely impacted by these polluting infrastructures.
Mm-hmm. I remain excited about the opportunity to put tools in the hands of people who are not, say, the experts in leveraging these tools. And there are things that we are able to do now that were so difficult, even 5 or 10 years ago. But now we've got in our hands, in our cell phones, the ability to create story maps or the ability to collect information and to share it with analysts. I'm a data nerd. I'm a proud blurred. But I recognize that even if you're looking at a spreadsheet with numbers and addresses, it's when you see it actually graphically depicted, it has a totally different impact than that spreadsheet. I can't stop thinking about the importance of the graphic and the visualization of data, places, of, as you said, not just harms, but our treasures as well. So I'm excited about the work that you're doing. Excited about the opportunities that we now have to help further the work.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.
And we're coming to about the close of the hour. Montina, it is an absolute pleasure to meet you. Adrienne, I'm always excited by the people that you bring to the North Star Gaze, and you have elevated what we are doing here at the North Star Gaze by the quality that you bring to these conversations. But Montina, you've just, my head is a little bit exploding right now as I think about all the things that you do and all the things that we might be able to do to work with you. But thank you so much for your time today. We truly appreciate you.
Thank you. Again, the privilege and the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Montina. Thank you, Erica.
Thanks for listening to the North Star Gaze, intimate stories from geoluminaries. If you're inspired to advance racial justice in geofields, please share this podcast with other listeners in your community. The intro and outro are produced by Organized Sound Productions with original music created by Kid Bodega. The North Star Gaze is produced in large part by donations and sponsorship. To learn more about North Star GIS, check us out at northstarofgis.org and on Facebook or Instagram at GIS North Star. If you'd like to support this podcast and North Star of GIS, consider donating at northstarofgis.org/donate. Or to sponsor this podcast, email podcast@northstarofgis.org. You've been listening to the North Star Gaze.